it's not costing them money when somebody on the production line scratches the door and they have to replace it, because they've realized over the years that there's going to be X amount of refrigerators that go out that are going to get damaged, by shipping, by receiving, that they're going to have to account for, right? And it needs to be the same for our customers. It needs to be the same for our business. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time of the day, whatever day it may be for you. Welcome back to another week, another recording of Midweek Modern Craftsman. Look, I need to tighten up the arm on this microphone some. It's a little wobbly. I also, if you guys are watching this on YouTube, I'm not sure how many do, but I'm switching up the camera here a little bit. So it should make for a little bit better video the way that I'm orienting the camera now, to be able to capture a little bit more so that we're not having to zoom in and crop most of this picture out. So hopefully that's good. If you guys are watching it, if we're creating reels from it, should be a little bit more usable, a little bit more difficult for me, because while I'm recording, I'm now watching a video of myself that's completely sideways. But luckily, I'm not focusing on that video too much anyway. A little bit of a distraction, but I think I'll get used to it. I'm looking at my taped fingers right now. So I had an enduro race this past weekend. Not sure when this is going to come out, but was the first, let's see, today's the 13th, I don't know, 10th or 11th. First race of the season. A bunch of the New Jersey enduros are going to be canceled because of some stuff that's happening with legislation in the state forest. Bit of a hassle. But first race this weekend, and I was pumped. It was Sunday. I was racing with two of my buddies, and it wasn't necessarily the first test or the first section, more like the third, but it was the first race section. I broke my shifter off my bike, like completely off, all the way up near the spindle that comes out of the transmission. So I was riding and then I didn't have a shifter. Created some issues. I was stuck in third gear in a muddy and hilly section of the race. Made me crash out a handful of times. Ended up taking water on my bike that I didn't know about. I lost my roll chart, which is basically a map of times, mileage, where you should be on the course at any given time. So from the get-go, I was behind time. I was running without a shifter. I took on water. I lost my roll chart, and I was pretty much ready to pack it in. And then I made my way out of that section very late. And a buddy of mine in another club was like, hey, I might have another shifter. So he gave me another shifter. They all left because it's a timekeeping event. So realistically, like, you want to be at a certain point in the race at a certain time. And if you run a perfect race, you're on time the entire race. If you're early, you get penalized. If you're late, you get penalized. So I was late, getting penalized because I didn't have a shifter. And then I was trying to fix my bike, pulled over, crashing. It was just a bit of a mess. So they gave me the shifter. Everyone left. I was like, don't screw up your race, because my day's over. You guys go. I'll get a shifter on. So I carry tools with me. I pull the shifter off, put the new shifter on. I go to ride away and shift, and it hits the case on the side of my bike. So I can't shift out of first gear. I can go from first into neutral, and then I can't get up into second gear. So I didn't want to try and bend it while I was on my bike and break something within my bike. So I looked around for something that I could bend the shifter with. I was on a sand road. There was not much that I could do. I was by myself. So I just put it in my bag, and I limped through the next section. I put my bike in second gear because third gear in the previous section was pretty tough. I was really fanning my clutch. I was stalling a lot because it's pretty technical, muddy. And third gear was just a bit too tall for a lot of that stuff. So I was like, maybe second gear will be better. So I put it down into second gear with some pliers. And then that section was a little bit faster speed, so second gear was not the right move. I was basically hung up in second gear because I couldn't go any faster, and I was wringing my bike out, and I was like, "This is just stupid." So I get out of that section, and there was a really, really long road transfer. But again, I didn't have a roll chart to know how far this road transfer was. So like 20 minutes later on a road that I can just see no end in sight, which is probably 55 miles an hour. Um, I'm in second gear just putting down the road. And I was like, all right, I don't know how long this is. Eventually, after 20 minutes, I pulled over, grabbed my pliers, clicked my bike up into third gear, rode the rest of the road transfer for another probably 15 minutes or so. Third gear, get to a lunch stop, a gas stop, and was like, "Hey, Johnny, thanks for the shifter. Doesn't fit my bike." He's like, "Well, I don't need it. You can bend it or do whatever you have to do." So then a couple of guys helped me out, grabbed a trailer hitch, a hammer, and we bent the shifter to clear the case on my bike. At this point, I was just trying to make it through the race because I entered the one section 11 minutes late. So you just scored 11 points, which at that point you pretty much you're not going to do well. It's like golf. It's the lowest points wins. So I probably took a 5 extra points in the first section when the shifter broke, 11 entering the next one, trying to fix the shifter and then having to pull it back off and then going, and then another 3, 4 after lunch, and then probably another 5, 6 in the last test. So it was, I probably had like 40 points extra that I shouldn't have had if I didn't run into these issues. But I did finish the race. So I got the shifter on. It was bent way out from the bike just to try and make it work. So it was interfering with my foot, and I kept shifting usually down when I didn't want to. Um, and I'm in the last section. I enter it late, and there was like 5 miles that I felt good, and then all of a sudden I couldn't ride anymore, and I started crashing all these corners. I was like blowing corners. My bike just felt very unsettled, but I was frustrated. I was tired. I was tired of crashing, and I didn't ever like I wasn't with my friends. I didn't stop to think about what was going on. I just kept riding it out. Ended up ripping my water bag off. It was hanging around my neck. And at this point, I was like, there's only a couple more miles because I knew what my odometer was reading and I knew when the race was going to end around 80 miles. I was at like 78. I'm just going to push through. So I get to the end of the race. One of my buddies is there. One of my buddies is still behind me. And I go to put my bike in neutral and it won't go in neutral. And I was like, whatever, I'll just shut the bike off. Shut the bike off. And then when we go to ride back to where we parked, I start the bike up. I had it in neutral when it was off. And then I go to put it in first gear with the clutch fully in it, and the bike just takes off. And I was like, damn it, I toasted my clutch. So like throughout the day between the riding in third gear in the mud in the hills, probably heated the clutch up. At some point I took on some water, which made its way into my engine. Not enough to overheat the bike, but enough. It's a wet clutch. It goes through the engine oil enough to burn my clutch plates up. So now my clutch was never fully disengaging. So the reason I couldn't ride and I had like probably 5 good miles, is like my clutch was probably okay or not as burnt. And then when I started riding and pushing the bike harder with a shifter on there, I completely torched it. So every time I would pull the clutch in, it wasn't disengaging. So my bike was essentially still in gear at that point, which explained the issue I was having in all these tight corners where I would pull the clutch in or feather the clutch thinking it was going to kill some of the power to the rear wheel, get me around these tight corners. And when I was pulling the clutch in, the bike actually wasn't stopping, which you would think in your head, hey, yeah, that's really easy. You should know that. But like in the heat of the moment, when you're physically exhausted, mentally exhausted from trying to battle through this all day, and then it's just a beat up course with a bunch of trees, and ruts, and it was very muddy. It's rained for the past month. We got a lot of rain leading up to the event. Um, it was tough to tell really what the bike was doing because the course and the conditions didn't feel like normal. So your bike didn't feel like normal in general. And I just attributed it to me being tired and all that stuff. Um, so woke up Sunday a little battered, bruised, hand hurt, neck hurt. I crashed a lot, real tired, real sore, and like a terrible showing in the event. And my bike, not terribly blown up, but blown up. And I woke up and was like, what the hell happened the day before? This was terrible. So I didn't enjoy myself in the race. I got through it with the busted bike and limped my way through it and powered through. Um, but I'm not sure if that was the move. I guess from a practicality standpoint, I probably did more harm than good. But at the end of the day, I didn't really get hurt. I really didn't damage my bike that much. And I powered through a situation that was very difficult and not that much fun. So at least I have that to hang my hat on. So if you are watching this, you wonder why my fingers are taped. That's why. That was a crash into a tree. It was a long day, tough day. Not happy with my results, but what are you going to do? Can't do much about it. It's a shame. The last 3 races I've done, I've had some issues that I've ran into that I feel like I haven't been able to ride and reach my full potential. And it's been pretty disappointing. But this one was more, hey, there's nothing I can do about it. It sucks. It's a pain in the ass, but there were some lessons learned. And on to the next one. So let's talk about my podcast. Excuse me. Um, I was at IBS recently. We're speaking at JLC this week. If you haven't signed up, sign up for that. It is, let's see, just looking into business things and talking about the subjects that we've been doing, what I've been speaking about, the questions that I've been getting, the emails that I've been getting. I've been giving a lot more thought. A lot of this has been due to consulting calls too. So I've had, thank you to everyone who's been booking consulting calls. I have really, they've taken off the past couple months, and then I had a little bit of free time with work a couple days, so I put it out there that I was offering some more consulting calls. I had some time open up. I think I had 4 or 5 people book them. So I've been speaking to people about their business, and most of the people are smaller owner operators, or they're just starting their business. And they want to understand pricing. They want to understand how to market themselves, essentially how to be small and make a living, because you're really depending on your time. And how do you structure your business that it's not just an exchange of your time for money, right? How are you capitalizing and maximizing your profitability that you're able to make enough money that if you're not on the job, you can sustain, that you can work with the inefficiencies of being a small business and still charge a rate and account for all of that downtime and those inefficiencies that no matter what size business you are, they're all there. But with a smaller business, you're depending on yourself to make money. So for a lot of us, it's like, hey, if we don't have a tool belt on, we're not making money. And I had that same mindset for a really long time, but that's the wrong mindset to have, because at the end of the day, if you're an owner operator, you're a small business, you don't have an estimator, you don't have an accountant, you don't have a project manager, you don't have a super, you don't have, sometimes just a go-getter, and you shouldn't be doing all of that shit for free. And it's the same principle when you get bigger, right? And you start hiring a project manager and you hire a super, you hire a helper, whatever it may be. We cannot go into this thinking that we're going to get 40 hours out of that person per week. And if we don't, it shouldn't be us paying for the downtime, right? If our helper or our super, our project manager worked 38, like was productive for 38 hours, and we're paying them for 40, a lot of us are paying out of pocket for those 2 hours that we weren't productive, which is the wrong thing to do. Because you look at, sorry, my nose is itching. I think my cat was rubbing on my damn microphone. If if any other business, when you look at it, right, if it's an IT company, if it's Google, if it is a large architecture firm, whatever it may be, like my wife's work, I see her work from home, and there's times when she's working really hard, and there's times where she's like, it's not socializing in a bad way, but she's courting potential partners. She is speaking with right, they get done a meeting and her team's on the meeting and they're talking about what their week looks like, what happened at home, what their kids did. And like, that's part of business. It's impossible to be productive and to expect your employees to be productive for 40 hours in a 40-hour work week. It's just impossible. If you run and go to the bathroom, if you pick up a phone call, if you look at your phone, if you talk to a customer, all of this affects your efficiency and affects your productivity. The goal would be to minimize all of those inefficiencies, right? You don't want to spend 2 hours a day speaking with your coworkers after a meeting, but like, yeah, you're going to stay on the call and you'll talk to them for 5-10 minutes. In an office setting, if you pass somebody in the hall and it's like, hey, how was your weekend, right? Who's paying for that? Like, the owner of the company in these bigger companies isn't like, well, they talked to somebody for 2.5 minutes, so now I have to pay their rate for 2.5 minutes. No, that's built into the cost of business. These bigger businesses understand that they're not capturing 100% productivity out of every employee. And the owner of the company, like myself, I'm not 100% productive. So what I would do early on, um, to counter that inefficiency, is I would work 9 hours in order to get 8 hours of work in. And, that turned into working 10 hours to get 8 hours of work in. And the busier I get and the more I have going on, the more complex jobs, the it's not necessarily inefficiency as far as it's not work that has to get done for the job. It does, but when I look at my workflow, it's inefficiency. So if I want to produce 40 hours of tool belt on work a week, and I have to meet with customers, I have to meet with subs, I have to do material takeoffs, I have to measure, I have phone calls that come in, I have emails that I have to get to, I have meetings that I have to do. I probably have to be on the job for 48 hours to be able to get 40 hours worth of productivity. I shouldn't not be getting paid for that 48 hours. Like, all of that time is attributed to either this job or another job. It's all the cost of doing business. It's all associated with doing business. These bigger companies where coworkers pass each other in the hall and they're maintaining a relationship between employees, between team members, and asking how they're doing personally, how they're holding up, how their dad's doing that's in a hospital. Like, that's part of it. That's part of work. That's part of being a human. That's part of maintaining company and business morale. All of that is the cost of doing business, in my opinion. You have to limit it, right? You don't want people going out and putting a company lunch on for an hour, 2 hours each and every week to discuss what's going on in their personal life. But if a team member's not producing and there's an issue and you're taking time to ensure that they're good emotionally to be able to produce on the job, like, realistically, that's part of life. That's part of job, and it's unavoidable. And we should try and capture those costs as much as possible. Control them, but capture them. So, one thing that I realized speaking to a lot of people with these consulting calls, is that they are not accounting for these inefficiencies. And it's something that I didn't do for a long time. And on that subject, if you want to schedule a consulting call, shoot me an email, tyler@trghomeconcepts.com. Again, most of the people I speak to are smaller owner operators, maybe 1, 2 guys, maybe just starting their own business or looking to switch, and they want to try and figure out how to be profitable while remaining small, which is something that I feel I've done a pretty good job at to support the lifestyle that we want and make a living while not killing myself working. It's really easy to make a living working 80 hours a week, but if you want to work 40 hours a week and actually get paid a decent rate. I've found a decent way to do that over the years. So if you want to schedule something, shoot me an email. We'll figure that out. But a lot of these people that I speak to with these smaller companies, I realize that they are not accounting for these inefficiencies when they are working, and they're not charging for them. So when I go to bid a job and when I determine my rate early on, I would look and say, hey, I can work 40 hours this week. The job's going to take me 4 weeks. Um, Realistically, if I want to work 40 hours a week, I have to be on the job probably with the tool belt on 48 due to just things related to that job that take me and pull me away from swinging my hammer um, in the proverbial sense, right? It's impossible if I spend 40 hours on the job with my tool belt on to get 40 hours worth of productivity. So some of that inefficiency is directly related to this job. Some of it may be related to another job that's coming up. Some of it may be related to an issue I'm having on a past job that's already closed out, but it's all related to this work. Um, Again, there are certain things, right? If I go out to lunch with a high school friend that I haven't seen in a while, that's not an inefficiency that's related to my job. Yeah, there's probably a few times in a year that happens, but it's limiting the inefficiencies that are controllable, right? Making mistakes is sometimes absolutely unavoidable. I would bid jobs as if they were going to go perfect and we were going to have perfect weather, but that's just not realistic. And that's not realistic in any business, not just construction. Every single business employees make mistakes, and almost every single business, they get paid to make those mistakes. It's built into the cost of doing the job. If we are bidding jobs based on an assumption that nothing will go wrong, we will be completely on schedule. The weather will cooperate every single day. We're going into a job shooting ourselves in the foot. We're going into the job and it's going to be a loss because we didn't account for any downtime, any mistakes, and you have to account for mistakes. Even the best people in the world, the most professional high level athletes, they make mistakes. We make mistakes. Our employees who are learning make mistakes, and that's the cost of doing the job. There's mistakes on jobs that sometimes are unique and they do cost us, right? If you have somebody damage a countertop that has to get replaced, that's not a mistake that you're going to have on each and every job. That's really something you can attribute to every job throughout the year. You can figure a rate where it's like, hey, we're usually having a roughly this amount of damage per year. And if we weren't in business, we wouldn't have that damage. So let's average that out. But you can't necessarily attribute these big catastrophic mistakes to each and every job. But some of the downtime and the fluff and the inefficiencies due to mistakes where it's like, hey, we nailed a plate in the wrong place and then we built a wall on it and now we have to pull it down. Like that's going to happen on every project. And if you're not accounting for that, it would be great if that didn't happen, but it's gonna happen. Like mistakes are gonna happen. A stair stringer may get cut the first round through, and then you have to remake it. Like it's just unavoidable stuff. People are humans. You need to account for that. You need to account for your employees to do that. You need to account for yourself to do that. So when I determine my rate, I'm looking at it as, hey, I'm only going to be productive for 32 hours in a 40-hour work week. 8 of those hours are devoted to that job or my business in general, and it's up to me to figure out where to allocate them. Are they allocated into my rate? Is it allocated into my overhead? But it needs to be accounted for, and if not, you're losing money and you're leaving money on the table. I was looking at this. Um, I would recommend going on to the website as well, www.moderncraftsman.co, and look up blog 57, accounting for inefficiency, because it the way I wrote it, there's a lot of detail there, and then there's also some examples of what this looks like in a real world example, right? But in summary, if like your workflow and productivity can be reduced 15 to 25% due to interruptions, distractions, complications, mistakes, whatever it may be on a job. So if you're looking at a job and you're bidding it a certain way and you're bidding it at 100% efficiency, there's days where somebody's going to show up sick and not be 100%. And if you bid that job that you were getting 100% out of them, you're paying for that reduced efficiency. That's literally costing you money. And in my opinion, that should be built into the cost of your job throughout the year or this job in general, where it's not realistic to be 100% efficient. So you could lose efficiency out of each employee by 15 or 25% over the cost of, or over a week's worth of time, over a day's worth of time. So I look at it, let's go on like the low end of that and say that your productivity is going to be reduced by 10% for an employee. That is 48 minutes of inefficiency in a day. So if an employee works 8 hours, there's going to be 48 minutes throughout that day, whether they're running to the bathroom, whether they're sharpening their pencil, whether they're taking a phone call, whether they made a mistake, right? There's going to be 48 minutes of inefficiency throughout the day. It doesn't seem like a lot. And like that seems like a realistic number. Sometimes it's going to be 30. Sometimes it might be an hour and a half. On average, 48 minutes of inefficiency at a 10% inefficiency rate. Now let's extrapolate that to a 6-month project. So a 6-month project is going to be roughly 26 weeks at 4.33 weeks per month. So if you have 4 guys or girls working on a 26-week project and you want 40 hours per week for them, that's 4,160 man hours to complete that job. Now you reduce that efficiency by 10%, you're only getting 3,744 hours out of them, which accounts to 416 unproductive hours on a job that if you're not accounting for and you're not finding a way to, one, keep those inefficiencies under wraps and do the best to minimize that, but 10% is very low. Like that's good. I would be happy with that. But 4,160 man hours reduced by 10%, you're losing 416 hours over the course of that 6 months. And if you're paying somebody, if it's costing you $50 to $100 per hour to bring these people on, like you can do the math there. You're losing money very quickly if you're not accounting for that, if your customers aren't paying for that. It's part of our business. It's part of life. It's part of the human error. And it's completely unavoidable. 10% reduction in productivity is that would be a very clean operating margin that you're working with. That's very low. And to think on a 6-month job, you could be losing 416 hours from 4 employees. That's a big number. That costs a lot of money. And that's why a lot of us have trouble having employees and making money, or even if you're an owner operator, making money for yourself, because you look at each week as if you're going to get 40 hours of work into that week. And realistically, you're probably only going to get 32 if you're only spending 40 hours on the job. And so what we end up doing is we say, all right, we're going to work 10-hour days, 12-hour days. We're going to start working Saturday. So now you're working 60 hours to get 40 hours of productivity, where those extra 20 hours are completely attributable to your business and to your operating costs and wherever you want to find the place that lives in your business. It's money that you should be capturing. It's time that you should be capturing. You won't capture every mistake. There's the big mistakes where it's like, we broke a TV because we didn't have it protected enough. Like that's just something that you're going to have to eat. If you're in a business where you're working around a lot of TVs, I would probably account for a certain amount of repairs or fixes throughout the year that's unavoidable. But for most of us, those bigger issues, right? You just damaged a refrigerator. It might happen once every few years, and you can't necessarily, like, that's just the loss. That's the cost of doing business. But the stuff that you deal with on a daily basis, that's the stuff that's really costing you money, right? 416 man hours over the course of 6 months is costing you a lot more money than the one TV that you have to replace every 5 years. So even if you're not accounting for the one TV that you have to replace every few years, if you can account for just that 10% reduction in efficiency, you're going to be in a much better spot there. Sorry, I'm looking up something on my phone right now. Yeah, so I'm looking at like 416 hours, and if that the cost of that employee to you, right? If you're paying them $40 an hour and they're costing you 80 without any sort of markup, just say the cost of that is over $33,000. Um, and that's probably why a lot of us are losing money, not making money. It's you're not accounting for these inefficiencies. It's not made up for in your labor burden. It's not made up for in your markup, your rate, wherever that cost is living according to your business and your accounting and the way that you're operating. I know for me, it's very simple because I'm small, but with bigger companies and with more employees, there's a place for that to live, and it gets a little bit more convoluted, but it needs to be somewhere. So that's a big thing that I think a lot of us are missing out on and not capturing. And the big thing to remember here, right? Like, part of the reason that I operate my business the way that I do is there's all of these potential losses within our industry, like these losses and this, there's stake, right? There's liability, there's risk as a business owner, and bringing on an employee, there's going to be risk no matter what. There's going to be mistakes no matter what. And a lot of our industry, and not our industry, but our consumer market doesn't want to foot the cost of those mistakes, right? They want to assume that the job's going to go flawless and it should only be this amount of hours and you shouldn't be charging me for mistakes that you guys are making. But then I look at what they do for work and I look at the mistakes that they make and that they fix, and that is generally not on their own time. And that's not to say that everyone, but like, if somebody works for a bigger company or an office job and they make a mistake on a spreadsheet and it costs the company X amount of money, that employee isn't, they're not saying, hey, you're not going to get paid for this. Like, they get paid for it. And it's up to the owner of the business to account for those mistakes. Generally speaking, I want to get paid for the work that we put in. I want to get paid a fair rate. If I'm trying to solve a problem on your job and it's a problem that's unique to that job and there's a learning curve associated with it and there's going to be some trial and some error, I don't feel that as a business owner I should be liable and at risk for that learning curve when this is your project. This is what you want in your house. This is what the designer wants in your house. You have to be that customer has to be willing to bear the expense of that. And when you look at these bigger companies, right, like the company that makes refrigerators, it's not costing them money when somebody on the production line scratches the door and they have to replace it, because they've realized over the years that there's going to be X amount of refrigerators that go out that are going to get damaged, by shipping, by receiving, that they're going to have to account for, right? You think about UPS and the amount of packages that get go missing. You think about Home Depot and how much merchandise gets stolen. You don't think that we're paying for all of that stolen merchandise in the cost of every single thing in Home Depot? You think that Home Depot is just taking a loss on all of that and not accounting for that? No, they absolutely are. And as customers, we are conceding to covering the cost of all of that stolen merchandise every time that we swipe our credit card at Home Depot. And it needs to be the same for our customers. It needs to be the same for our business. And I want to work for customers who understand that. I want to work for customers who understand that there's going to be mistakes and there's going to be a learning curve, and that that's just the cost of doing their project in order to get the execution that we want. So it's something to consider for all of you, whether you work by yourself, whether you have employees, whether this is going into your labor burden, whether it's in your markup, your overhead, whatever it may be. If it's just in your rate, right? Like the way that I look and determine my rate, I cover that in my rate, my efficiency and how much efficiency I'm actually getting per hour. So I look at what I want to make per hour, what I can actually be as far as efficient, and I want to make that same rate. So whatever my rate is for 40 hours, if I realize I'm only going to be on average 32 hours of productivity in a week, I take my number that I want to make and I divide it by 32 instead of 40. And that puts me in the ballpark of where I need to be. And that covers not every mistake. It doesn't cover every issue, but it covers a lot of it. And then it's up to us to find customers who are willing to sign up and understand that that's the cost of doing business, rather than coming in and cutting our prices and offering value to customers because we're less expensive. That's what I believe that we all need to do. And I think that any business owner that starts in our business starts realizing that this is what's going to happen. It's going to make for a more profitable business. Your employees are going to feel less stressed. You're going to have less resentment towards employees that do make mistakes while they're learning, which is absolutely realistic. But now when it's not necessarily costing you money for them to redo something for an hour, where it's not like I'm literally paying you for the hour that you did it the first time, the hour that it took to rip it out, and then the hour to redo it. When you realize that's the cost of doing business, and that's just realistic sometimes in our business, you will not feel the same way towards the mistakes that people are making, because everyone makes them. So hopefully this helps you guys in your business and create a little bit more wiggle room in your numbers and some profitability for yourself. Again, if you have questions about this, reach out. If you want to hop on a phone call, reach out, Tyler at trghomeconcepts.com. I think that this should be very helpful for you guys. And if it's something that you haven't considered or you haven't really analyzed in a few years, maybe it's time to look back into it and see what your productivity is and what your inefficiency rate should be. All right, guys and girls, hope you have a good week. Hope everyone is enjoying daylight savings time here on the East Coast. It's staying light a little bit later. Feels a little bit more like spring. The sun shining. Hopefully the rain is gone away and the seasonal depression can be on its way as well. I'll catch you guys all next week. Thank you again.